From the deserted towns and villages of the south to the dense district of Dahaya in the capital, the bombs continue to fall. Dozens of fresh Israeli strikes on Lebanon today, inflicting yet more damage on a nation already on its knees.
We
will not hesitate for a moment to follow up on the role of diplomacy, and we have no choice but the diplomatic option.
Diplomacy feels distant right now. Beneath this rubble was the central nervous system of Hezbollah and its leader. Hassan Nasrallah was killed here when this city block was levelled on Friday by the biggest airstrike on Beirut in almost 20 years. Israel says it killed 20 other top commanders of varying ranks in this bombing raid. But despite decapitating the movement with Nasrallah's death, Israel vowed to continue their assault on Hezbollah, saying their, quote, work has still not been completed. At your service, O Hassan, she shouts repeatedly of the Shia militant leader's death. As a Christian, this woman says, today I come to work in black because I no longer have anyone to defend my land. There are some here who celebrated Nasrallah's death, but they did so behind closed doors for fear of reprisals. Officially, this is a nation in mourning for 5 days. For many, though, their main concern is finding a home. The interim Prime Minister warned at present there could be as many as 1 million displaced people in Lebanon, numbers which could yet rise further still. As Israeli tanks gather on the Lebanese border and Israel's defense minister talks of a possible, quote, expansion of activities. Though some believe the last year in Gaza has dampened the appetite to place Israeli boots on Lebanese ground. How concerned are you about a ground invasion?
Frankly speaking, I believe that this would be an opportunity for the resistance to inflict heavy casualties on the Israelis. Look, most expertise acquired by Hamas was learned from Hezbollah. If Hamas, which is fighting in a tiny territory of a mere 300 square kilometers in Gaza, which is open space, okay, has been fighting for 11 consecutive months, crippling the land army of the Israelis. How would be the case in a more rugged territory, more complicated one, with hills and valleys and narrow strips, etc., against a force much stronger and in a territory that has strategic depth?
Each additional airstrike ratchets up the fear of escalation, not just here, but across the Middle East. This is a conflict that now risks spilling far beyond these borders.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the political analyst Dalia Scheindlin, who's based in Tel Aviv. And I began by asking her how she expected Iran to respond to the killing of yet another senior Hezbollah leader in Lebanon.
On Friday evening, there was an extremely high expectation that there would be a harsh response, missile attacks, of course, from Hezbollah and possibly from Iran. What we realized is that over the last couple of days, the organization doesn't seem to have the capacity to respond with a major barrage of rockets, and Iran is apparently still calculating what its response should be. And there are also reasons why Iran might not want to respond immediately, chief among them that this could spark the regional war that Iran is concerned about, especially with a strong American presence in the region.
I guess Israel can't afford to take that for granted, given that Iran has said there will be reprisals. And, you know, back in 2006, many people are looking back to that war between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel really underestimated Hezbollah at that point, didn't it?
Yes, but apparently Hezbollah also underestimated Israel. And it was Nasrallah, of course, himself who said that if he had known about the severity of Israel's response, he might not have undertaken the original operation that sparked that war. No, Israel absolutely cannot take for granted that there won't be a response, but there's no way to anticipate whether it will be immediate or longer term possibly, and what form it might take.
Do you still expect Israel to mount a ground invasion, and what are your fears if that does happen?
It's not unlikely. However, I think the major dilemmas the major things we need to look out for is whether this will be a ground operation that seems to be very targeted and limited, or if it looks like it's the kind of operation that goes into something more ongoing.
And when you think that the strikes are still ongoing in Gaza, I mean, does it have the capacity to fight on two fronts?
It has the capacity to fight on two fronts, but it does mean moving forces from the south to the north, and that's already happened. And it means probably, to some extent, lowering the intensity of the fighting in Gaza. We've seen an announcement by the Israeli authorities over the last number of days that Hamas has been defeated militarily. Israel has not defined a strategic endpoint, not to the war in Gaza and not to this operation in Lebanon.
And when you look at the terrible number of casualties in Gaza now, nearly 42,000 Palestinians killed, 1,000 killed in Lebanon, 6,000 injured, 1 million people displaced. Do you worry about Israel's standing internationally because of that?
Israel's standing internationally is at its lowest point possibly in its history. That doesn't mean it's completely isolated yet. There's still worse it can get. But Israel is facing trouble with its most stalwart allies. Israel is facing the possibility of some sort of constraints or restrictions on arms exports from a number of countries. Even the U.S. has been possibly delaying one shipment and will continue to think about how to apply U.S. law, restricting the export of arms if there is a danger that they are violating human rights. I think that's a conversation that is going on in the Democratic Party. But this has already created trouble at the political level with the U.S.-Israel relationship and with other allies. Now, Israel doesn't have to be completely isolated, but Israel has been cultivating a series of non-democratic allies over the years.
Despite testing its relationship with its strongest ally, the United States, almost to destruction, Netanyahu's ratings domestically are going up.
There's no question that the current war will boost his ratings in my mind. Again, they may have a cap, we don't know. And I think it's a little bit overstating the case to assume that he would either start or continue a war just for that reason. Having said that, Netanyahu's own political fortunes have never been absent from his decision-making, and whether or not we think that, the reality is that the Israeli public thinks that.
Dalia Scheinlin, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, joining me now from Birmingham is the Shadow Foreign Secretary and former Deputy Foreign Secretary, Andrew Mitchell. Andrew Mitchell, how worried are you about the scale of Iran's potential response?
Well, I think the Iranian government would be very wise to rein in its proxies, both Hamas and Hezbollah, and to listen carefully to what the United Nations said about the importance of a ceasefire. And I think that although it will be difficult to get a ceasefire, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701 shows the way. It's important that Hezbollah now retreats behind the Litani River and that the bombing and the shelling of Israel ceases immediately.
Well,
and that's the way we want to see affairs moving now.
But Israel's not listening to those calls for a ceasefire. And when you look at the number of people who have now been killed, 1,000 in Lebanon, tens of thousands of Palestinians, and many more than that injured and displaced, should the UK be rather more forceful in standing up to Israel on that?
Well, Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation prescribed by the UK, much the same way as ISIS and ISIL and Al-Qaeda. We have no truck whatsoever with Hezbollah in any shape or form, and the Israelis have been shelled by Hezbollah, and so they are entitled under international law to defend themselves and to respond to that. And that is why I say I think the United Nations Security Resolution 1701 helps to point the way towards a ceasefire. But Israel is entirely entitled to hit back, as they have done, against Hezbollah. Hezbollah is shelling its people and has meant that many of them have had to leave their homes and move inside Israel. And that is completely wrong.
Would you back a ground invasion if Israel launches a ground invasion in Lebanon? Or would you start to say what the current government has said, that, you know, they've curbed arms exports to Israel? Would you back that?
No, Hezbollah must stop shelling Israel. That is the key ingredient to any ceasefire and any future settlement. And if Hezbollah continues to lob shells into northern Israel, then the Israelis are entitled to self-defense. And if they judge that that requires a ground invasion or action on the ground, then I have no doubt they will take it, and they'll be doing it within international law. But my hope is that, as I say, that Hezbollah will withdraw behind the Litani River, and then we can start to make some progress towards a genuine ceasefire.
You're there at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham. Kemi Badenoch, one of the leadership contenders, got into a fight about maternity pay earlier today. Is the nasty party back, as your former leader Theresa May used to call it?
Certainly not, and I think that Kemi has issued a clarification for what she said earlier today. But we mustn't be frightened of talking about these issues. One of the things that the party's got to do in opposition is to provide a credible alternative government. And we won't do that if we refuse even to discuss these matters. But as I say, Kemi has issued a clarification of what she said earlier.
Well, she didn't need to clarify one thing. She said there was a time when there wasn't any maternity pay and people were having more babies. I mean, it's quite clear the kind of import of what she said there.
No, I don't agree. She's made it absolutely clear that she supports maternity pay, and we all support maternity pay. It's a very important part of the social infrastructure and protection.
OK, but when you have two leadership contenders calling for a withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights, you have another one, Kemi Badenoch, harking back to an era before maternity pay. How important would you say it is that whoever wins this contest takes the party back to the centre ground?
Well, everyone here in Birmingham knows that parties only win elections from the centre ground. They don't win elections from either of the left or the right. It is parties which command confidence from the centre ground that win. And none of that will be lost on all four of the excellent leadership candidates who will be, one of whom will be elected on November the 2nd as the leader of the opposition and the leader of the Conservative Party.
Andrew Mitchell, thank you very much for joining us.